Okay, Wally, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good Erev Shabbos.
Rest.
This morning, I want to talk about a practice that exists in almost every shul, and that is correcting the Baal Koreh when he makes a mistake. I want to discuss basically the whole practice of who should correct him, what mistakes are perhaps acceptable, what the machlok is.
Tell him to.
Wally, you got muted. Wally, you got muted. Unmute yourself. Wally, you're muted, Wally.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're okay.
Okay, let's start again. Kriyas Torah. By the way, the Kriyas Torah on Shabbos is a little bit different than the Kriyas Torah on Shabbos Mincha and Monday and Thursday. We'll get to that a bit later. But the Tur Shulchan Aruch brings down the basic machlokas, which is played out throughout the Rishonim and Achronim and even the Poskim today. The Tur quotes the Rambam in Hilchos Tefillah, who says very clearly, if you make any mistake, even on the dikduk of a letter, we make him repeat the word. The Sefer HaManhig, Ashkenazic Sefer Halacha, prefers not to correct the Baal Koreh for minor mistakes, and we'll discuss the difference between minor and major, because that it may embarrass the Baal Koreh. And he quotes a medrash, which Tosfos also quotes in Avodah Zarah, that even if you read the name Aharon as Haron, it's okay. You don't have to correct him. The Shulchan Aruch, however, paskins like the Rambam, that any mistake, any minor mistake that might change the meaning of the word, or even if it doesn't change the meaning of the word, should be corrected. Now, there are a lot of different opinions, and we'll try to go through a few of them. First of all, you have Trup. The Ta'amei HaMikra, the Trup that the Baal Koreh uses to read, in many, many situations, the Trup also has meaning. You can, many pshatim, the Vilna Gaon is very big on this. You can learn pshatim from the Trup itself. Where is it? Well, there are many examples of that. When Yehuda goes forward as Kadma v'Azla, or he got up and he went, but that's the Trup. The words support that particular pshat. All right, well, there are many examples of that. The Ramah, who we follow in Ashkenazi communities, says, based on the Trumas Hadeshen, that we only make a correction to the Baal Koreh when a mistake changes how the word is understood. So, mistakes in Tamei HaMikra, in Nikud, if it doesn't change the basic meaning of the word, then you don't have to correct him. Or perhaps you may not be allowed to correct him. We'll see that. There are obviously, if he makes a mistake and reads the wrong word, but it's a lot of complexity here concerning what you correct the Baal Koreh for and how you correct the Baal Koreh. These are two related halakhic concepts. First of all, you have Gaboyim who stand on either side of the Baal Koreh. Very similar. Aaron and Hur stood on either side of Moshe when he was praying to defeat Amalek. And so based on that, we have somebody standing on either side of the Baal Koreh. And it's their job, if they're paying attention, and that's the key word, if they're paying attention and not focused on who to give the next aliyah to, they should be the ones in a soft voice to correct the Baal Koreh. But that doesn't always happen, unfortunately. And so you have the situation where people from the congregation shout out corrections. And sometimes it's shouted out in a way that is perhaps not always bekovedik. It could be embarrassing to the Baal Koreh. And there's a special situation when you're dealing with a bar mitzvah boy. Usually, the person that taught the bar mitzvah boy how to lane stands next to him, and he can quietly correct any mistakes he might make, and that's what's usually done. But let's assume that the bar mitzvah boy learned how to lane, and he's encouraged to keep on laning, which we try to do. So it's 5 months after his bar mitzvah, and the 13-year-old is laning a parsha that he's never laned before, and he may make a few mistakes. So how do you correct this young Baal Koreh in order not to discourage him or not to embarrass him? Because some young boys can be very, very sensitive. I know I can speak from personal experience. My son learned how to lane for his bar mitzvah, and of course we encouraged him to keep on laning, which he did. But after doing it a few times and being corrected in a very rigorous way, he felt very uncomfortable and he stopped laning. He's a great Baal Tefillah and Chazan. He has no problems with doing that. But laning he stopped doing because he felt embarrassed and upset by the way he was corrected by somebody in the congregation. And that happens many, many times. Fortunately, many bar mitzvah boys go on to become very fine balei kriya. My grandsons are all wonderful balei kriya, and they lane beautifully, and then they can take it in stride if they make a mistake. Some people are a little more sensitive, perhaps. But even if you're for an adult, let's say an adult wants to lane his bar mitzvah parsha, which is probably the only parsha that he knows. And he gets up there to lane, and he makes the same mistakes that he made when he was 13 years old. And he's corrected. Now, that might discourage him from laning again, or it may not. But again, there's a way to correct somebody. Many poskim are very makpid about mistakes. Kriyas HaTorah, if you think about it carefully, is a reenactment of Ma'amad HaSinai. When the laning takes place, Hashem is speaking to us. We're learning the halachas from the Chumash. We're learning what the Torah is teaching us. And it's a modified Ma'amad HaSinai every time laning takes place. The Rambam says any minor mistake in trup, even in trup, should be corrected. Not everybody holds that way. The Ramah obviously does not. I can tell you that the Vilna Gaon was very, very makpid, and Rav Soloveitchik and his family, and those that came before and those that came after, very, very strict. The Rav tells a story when he was a young boy, and he was laning. I was asked and who was standing on either side of him. His father was on one side, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, and the great Reb Chaim was standing on the other side. And Reb Chaim says to him, make sure you don't make any mistakes. And the Rav was always very, very makpid. I can tell you, I mean, I'm not about Koreh, but I remember davening Musaf once at yeshiva, and the Rav was standing next to me. He stood because he had a bad back and he couldn't sit. But I got to tell you, it's a very terrifying experience to be davening with the Rav standing next to you. You can imagine if you're relating the Torah. His son-in-law, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, was a very, very strict Baal Koreh. He had a horrible voice, but when he laned, you could hear every mapik hey, every shvanah, every shvanach, all the dikdukim that most people forgot. He was very makpid. His lane took a long time. And there are a few balei kriya that I know in Bergen County who lane that way. They're very, very makpid on every little nekuda because you're laning from the Torah. It's Ma'amad HaSinai all over again. So, and if you think, there are many words, and we can go through a whole shiur just on the dikduk of Kriyas HaTorah. The difference between Vayotza and Vayetze, they look the same, but the meaning is very, very different. chalev, the fat of, or chalev, the milk of. Chalev, chalev, very close but very different. Chotosi, I have sinned. Chatosi, my sin. Very similar but very different. Vayiru, with two yuds, they were afraid. And Vayiru with one yud is they saw, but it can be read if you're very, very careful about how you read it. There's slight differences. Yeyaseh, Ya'aseh. These are, and there are dozens and dozens of words that are very, very similar. You also have differences in the shvanach, the mapik hey. When there are some people who are skilled who can enunciate those differences when they lane, but it's very, very important to distinguish between these words. Even the trup, if a person makes a mistake in the trup, we don't have to correct him. Today, we only, in most cases today, except in some yeshivish minyanim, in most cases, we don't make a correction unless it really changes the meaning of the word. And again, in the best circumstance, the gabayim standing on either side of the balkore should quietly be the ones to correct the balkore, but instead of people yelling it out from the side. Halachically, the kriya on Shabbos Mincha and Monday and Thursday does not require the same level of, correct laning as it does on Shabbos morning. The status, but again, we do correct people when they make mistakes. The difference between Minhag Ashkenaz and Minhag Sfarad, we already mentioned, the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. But I want to bring to your attention a fascinating psak that came out a number of years ago. And I admire Rabbanim who have broad shoulders, who are willing to take on the rabbinic establishment when it's perfectly grounded in halacha. Rav Yonatan Raziel from Ma'ale Adumim quotes the following. It's a radical psak because we don't necessarily always follow the Shulchan Aruch, but he writes in an article, in a tshuva actually, that when people correct the balkore, they should not do that. You should not correct the balkore, even if he left out letters from a word, if he mispronounced a word or a trup, you should not. He raises a fantastic concept because embarrassing somebody in public is a biblical prohibition. Getting a more correct Kriyas HaTorah is rabbinic in nature. So, D'Oraisa versus Rabbanon, D'Oraisa trumps Rabbanon. And again, there are many, many poskim who hold that you don't correct the balkori for minor mistakes. He says very clearly, you don't correct him, period, because that would embarrass him.
I think it would depend on the situation. Like there are times when I lane and I'm not really properly prepared, but I know the laning better than anybody else there, so I'll lane and I expect to get corrected, and I don't feel the least bit embarrassed in that situation. Or if you have a bar mitzvah boy, that's very, very different.
Okay, but for a bar mitzvah boy, it's definitely different. And most Baalei Kriya expect to be corrected, and they're not worried about it. In some cases, they even encourage it if they're serious Baalei Kriya. But sometimes even an adult can be embarrassed if he isn't a regular Baal Koreh. But also, and again, what about the appropriateness of people shouting out from the benches? Again, if the Gabayim were doing their job properly and paying attention to the Kriya and not focusing on, putting the paper clip in the right column for the amount of money the person may have donated in order to make the honor of the Aliyah, or who's going to call next or whatever. If you're paying attention to the Kriyas HaTorah, it's the Gabayim's job standing there to quietly correct the Balkori. But Rav Raziel raises a fascinating point. If the correction is going to result in embarrassing somebody, you don't do it, because embarrassing is doraisa, whereas Kriyas HaTorah is only drabbanan, not only, but is drabbanan. So again, there are, to be a good Baal Koreh is very challenging, because you have many, the average Baal Koreh is not makpid on certain minutia of Kriyas HaTorah. The Shvanah, the Shvanach, the Mapik Hey. Some people are not that makpid about that. And most people in shul wouldn't even know the difference. However, there are those who are very makpid, and those who are also makpid, like the Shulchan Aruch, who follows the Rambam. The Ramah is much more lenient and says that unless it changes the meaning totally, you shouldn't correct them.
Dr.
So,
Greene,
yeah.
may I weigh in?
Yes.
A big part of the problem is the culture of the shuls and the yeshivas that encourage people to do things that they are not trained to do and they shouldn't be doing. You wouldn't ask everybody in the yeshiva to give a chabura. You wouldn't ask everybody to play a concert and a concert pianist. I understand you have a bar mitzvah boy, and whether you should lane the whole parsha or just maftir, that's another debate. But to encourage kids who really have no training or ability to do a less than mediocre job is not doing them a favor, not doing the community a favor, and not doing the halacha a favor. So I'm not a fan of getting everybody up there to try to lane or to lane their parsha. That's not enough of a reason to lane in front of a shul.
You are 100% correct, and I'll support that with there are shuls that, very few, but there are some shuls that screen people before they allow them to lane.
As they should.
In the young Israel, where my son-in-law is a wonderful Baal Koreh, and so are his sons. He, for many years, he was in charge of vetting people who wanted to lane. And after a while, he stepped down from that position because there were so many people that really were not qualified, and he was under a lot of pressure to allow them to lane.
Well, Wally, why has the culture changed? I know I had a very long bar mitzvah pasha, and the person that was teaching me basically spoke to me, and he asked me questions, and by the time he's finished, he told me, he said, "You're better off just doing the maftir and the haftorah." Why has the culture changed? I've been here in a field one for 38 years. I don't think I've ever heard one kid basically just do maftir and the haftorah. Well, in my day, in my bar mitzvah, there weren't a lot, but there were a few. Why has the culture changed to put pressure on kids that maybe should not be learning the full pasha to do it?
It's a very good question. There are many different answers to it. I can only say that there are places, still a few places, where there are standards in place, and not everybody gets up to lane. I remember when I was growing up, and I davened for a while in a shtibel. It was a very learned shtibel. I think the Gabbai himself had made a siyum on Shas 7 times. Very learned people there, and nobody under the age of 30 ever laned or davened for the Yomud. It just wasn't done. Kids for their bar mitzvah got an aliyah. That was it. In my shul growing up, bar mitzvah boys very rarely laned, and if they laned, it would just be maftir. They did the haftorah, and that was it. There are places where, Breuer's, for example, Breuer's has 2 chazanim, at least when I used to go there many years when I was first married. They have a chazan for Shacharis on Shabbos and a chazan for Musaf, because they don't let just anybody get up there to daven. There are halachas of who's allowed to be a shliach tzibur. The same thing to be a Baal Koreh. You have to know what you're doing, and you raise a very good question. Do we have standards? Who decides whether this kid is capable of laning? His bar mitzvah teacher, or the rabbi of the shul, or somebody else? It's a very good question. Abe also raises a very important question. There should be standards. There should be standards for who gets up to daven for the Yomid. There are halachos about it, but there seems to be ignored in many cases. And there are halachos as to, because when you lane, you are being motzi, you fulfilling the obligation of Kriyas HaTorah for the entire tzibur. And if you can't do a good job, it's very problematic. You might not be Yossi Kriyas HaTorah. And this is the basis of the machlokas between the Machaber and the Ramah. Because if you miss one letter or one word, that means your Kriyas HaTorah is deficient. You have not been Yosei the mitzvah of hearing the parsha being read. So that's a pretty serious concern for who should be the one who lanes. And that's why a person who lanes has to be a person who's competent. We have in our shul very many excellent Balei Kriya. We have others who are not so excellent, but they like to lane. And as a result, there are a lot of corrections. Sometimes people lane who haven't prepared properly, which happens. And again, most people, as Danny points out, if you are laning, you expect to be corrected. But some people are very sensitive about it. This is why we need leadership in this regard. Many, I don't know how many years ago, 40 years ago maybe, used to have a ritual committee in shul. I don't think there's a ritual committee anymore, which would decide on things like who could lane and things of that, and who can daven for the Obed. But that went by the wayside. Standards are very, very important. It's interesting that the Rambam, who's usually pretty, he's very, very makpid, but he was in a society where standards were not as high as they were in Ashkenaz, yet it was the Ashkenaz poskim who were more lenient than the Rambam. So it's a bit of a reversal there. So there's no total consistency there. Sof kol sof, the most important thing is not to embarrass a Baal Koreh, especially, and if it's a bar mitzvah boy who's laning, then the person who usually taught him how to lane is usually the one that stands next to him and corrects him. And people shouldn't shout it out. In general, they shouldn't shout it out from the benches if a Baal Koreh especially if it makes a mistake. But it's the Gaboyim's job on a regular Shabbos or a regular afternoon or Monday or Thursday to correct the Baal Koreh, and to do it, quietly, not to make a big deal about it if he makes a mistake. But unfortunately, in some places, everybody yells and shouts out. But that only happens when the Gabbai does not make the correction. And you only got a fraction of a second to do it. So you have to be on, which means everybody has to be paying attention, which is a separate shiur altogether. In any event, I just thought I would raise this issue because about Kriyas HaTorah is Hashem communicating to us through the reading of the Parsha, and therefore we have to hear every word and we have to hear it read properly. How important it is to hear every single nuance and every single, that's the machlokas haposkim. Those that follow Shulchan Aruch, those that follow the Ramah. Again, the Briska school following the Vilna Gaon, who accepts the Rambam, which is Shulchan Aruch paskins like, is to be very, very strict. Most people are not that strict, but when it changes a word, or S or an ace, we're not so concerned about. But there are many, many other words that could change the entire meaning if it isn't pronounced properly. Mistakes in the trup are not as seriously corrected as mistakes in the actual word itself. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done yet in terms of educating the shul as to what Kriyas HaTorah is all about, what the obligations are of the Baal Koreh, what the obligations are of those that are listening to the Baal Koreh, and above all else, not to embarrass somebody, which, as Rav Raziel points out, is a Doraisa issue more than the rabbinic issue of lady.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Just a comment on what Mendy had said when he was growing up and stuff. Bar mitzvah boys very often just laned maftir and then did the haftorah. So perhaps one of the things that's changed because Just at Shomrei, I've heard, on various occasions, the bar mitzvah boy does the kriya, and then someone else, his father or someone else, does the haftorah. And that might be in terms of straining the bar mitzvah boy to learn two different trups when it's like perhaps the first time around. And then the other thing, and I wish leadership at this shul and other shuls were paying attention to this shiur, because I think there really needs to be more sensitivity to the pressure of, keeping up with the Joneses in terms of, well, this bar mitzvah boy did all the laning, so you should. And, it's a fine line, unfortunately, that many parents have between, not wanting their child to seem incapable if he doesn't do the whole kriya, as opposed to really stressing out the kid who might not want to, or it might just be too difficult for him to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's tremendous pressure on kids today. You have a much higher percentage of kids going to yeshiva, and the pressure is on. And every yeshiva kid who gets bar mitzvah is expected to lay. And not every kid should lay. But the pressure, you're right, the pressure is definitely there. Again, we want to encourage our young men to lane. We want to get them more involved in the synagogue life. And that factors into it also. But by the same token, not every kid should be forced to lane. And I don't know if it's a function of leadership, if it's a function of keeping up with the Joneses or the Schwartzes. Everybody else does it. My kid has to do it also, or else I'll be embarrassed. Forget the kid. I'll be embarrassed if my kid can't lane. And these are issues that should be raised and discussed, but unfortunately, like many other things that come close to home, they're not discussed. And
of course,
it would be very dangerous for me to give a shiur on the shortcomings of rabbinic leadership. That would put me in Chayrim completely, more than I am already.
Wally?
Yeah.
In our era, I think basically Divrei Torah were the way to go. I remember I spoke like a half hour on halachas of Trillin. But I don't know when it started. I don't remember, maybe my grandchildren, I don't even know my children's age. I think years after they started doing laning. But years ago it was common, at least in the east side, where everybody got up and did a Divrei Torah, did a Dvar Torah. In your time also, right? You did a Dvar Torah also.
The Dvar Torah. I remember going to there was a conference once, Rav Schechter was speaking, and he was talking to a group of rabbis, rabbinic alumni. He was talking to a group of rabbis, and he gave a shiur on how to put it on tefillin. He's talking to rabbis, gave him a shiur on how to put it on tefillin. And by the time the shiur was over, nobody knew what they were doing properly or not. Because there are certain topics, for whatever reason, that people really don't get into. They take certain things for granted. Like a bar mitzvah boy has to lane. That's the accepted minhag in Orthodox shuls today. If the kid goes to yeshiva, he lanes. Whether the kid wants to lane, whether he's capable of laning, whether he's got a good voice or not. So these societal pressures are sometimes harmful.
Keeping up with the Cohens, that's all.
Yeah, and it's somewhat problematic. But in any event, when we hear the Kriya tomorrow, it's a very important. They're all important. Every parsha is important, but we should trust, hopefully, that the Gabayim will be doing their job. Hopefully, the Baal Koreh will not make any mistakes, and it'll be a wonderful Kriyas Torah. But if not, the Gabayim who are standing there should be the ones to correct him in a soft voice, and he should know himself if he makes. Now, sometimes a Baal Koreh who's landing very quickly doesn't realize he may have made a mistake. So that's why the Gabayim are following along. But calling out from the sidelines it can be embarrassing and disruptive. But if the Gabayim are not doing their job, then sometimes it might become necessary if, in fact, the mistake that was made is a serious mistake. So if you can't tell the shvanach from the shvanach, or a mapik hey or not, that's minor. Or a guy makes a mistake in the truck, that's a minor issue. But if the word itself is wrong, then we have to correct the Balkori. But hopefully, with Siyata Deshmaya, all of our Bali Kriya will not make any mistakes going forward.
Wally,
Yes.
I got a resolve for the whole problem.
Go ahead.
In any job that you do, you end up getting rated, right, for performance. The bottom line is you can see sometimes a gabbai forever and ever has never made one correction. So there should be a standard. If you can't, basically, if the gabbai can't do his job correctly, he should not be a gabbai, and that's the bottom line. I think in baseball they rate the umpire for the correctness of balls and strikes. Over here, we should have the correctness of basically correcting the bar mitzvah boy who doesn't have to, because a lot of times a bar mitzvah boy gets rattled also, and he's causing a very big problem. I think all the shuls should enforce this standard of the gabayim, and I think would have a much better product.
All right. So I don't necessarily envy you if you bring up the issue of standards at a shul board meeting.
Yeah.
Good
That would be a tough sell. But
I think in all the years I went to one board meeting, I got myself into trouble that one time that I went. So I don't go to board meetings anymore.
Yeah, but the issue of standards is it applies in so many different areas that I almost don't know where to begin.
It would be nice if maybe instead of pressuring the bar mitzvah boy to do the whole kriya, and kriya is important. But you know, these kids go to yeshiva, they know davening for chol. How well do they know to lead davening for Shabbos? And that maybe, you know, do a maftir aliyah, yes or no to the haftorah, and then be a Baal Musaf, at least a skill that happens, you know, every week, and you're not necessarily going to read Torah every week. So
well, that's what I did at my bar mitzvah. My bar mitzvah, I learned the maftir and haftorah and daven musaf. That's what I did at my bar mitzvah. Because and that was more. And most bar mitzvah boys just did the haftorah. That was it.
Right.
Very rarely would somebody learn the entire parsha. Once in a while.
No kidding.
But again, if we want to get involved with the issue of davening and siddur comprehension, those are hot buttons for me. And as I said many times in this group and elsewhere, that the siddur is the book with which we are most familiar and know the least about, because they don't teach it. And they daven every day in school, but they don't teach them what the words mean and the structure of the siddur and the meaning of the davening. That they don't do. And it's a big avla, because they grow up to be adults that they're familiar with the siddur, you know, but they read it like they read a newspaper. They just go flying through it without really paying attention to what the words are all about. But we've talked about that before. Anyhow.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful Shabbos, a wonderful Kriyas HaTorah.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Good Shabbos. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.